from Yaru.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start by making a comment. Those who rewrite history to fit their own narrative are not historians, but rather architects of deception, constructing half-truths to justify their own agenda. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have stood here and listened to those on the other side paint their own history of Trinidad and Tobago. And not every single citizen in this country are foolish people. We listen, and more so if I were to drive straight into the member for San Fernando East, spoke for 45 minutes. And what I would say was primarily a lot of fairy tale. Because I am of the view, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that every single number that has rolled out of the mouth of the member for San Fernando East, positive as they were, it had nothing to do with PNM brilliance. Nothing. It is whatever the IMF report has there has a lot to do with the rebounding of a slumbered economy after COVID. Yeah, because when you are sleeping and you wake up, industry comes alive. So you must grow. You must grow. That had nothing to do with PNM brilliance, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Nothing. Nothing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the minister, the junior minister, spoke about managing inflation and being able to bring it down from 8% to a very low percent somewhere in 2022. Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, that had nothing to do with PNM brilliance. That had to do with global shipping costs collapsing post-pandemic. A lot of costs that were driven up, that would have moved inflation up during the pandemic period, was because of international shipping costs and delay and so on. So I wanted to just put that on the record. I am happy for the numbers. We are all happy for the numbers because we want to grow, we want to develop in this country. But don't let the government come to this parliament and take kudos for something that had nothing to do with it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for San Fernando East spoke about our misunderstanding of what the term refinancing means. But we know it. We know it. Refinancing has a couple characteristics, which is not good characteristics. Because you refinance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you extend the length of a loan. What you do, yes, I could refinance, but nobody is going and refinance to pay it out faster, man. You refinance when you are in a bit of a difficulty to continue paying. And refinancing costs you as well. It is free. It's not free. No, you tell me where free finance is free, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Go ahead, member.
Deputy Speaker. But the junior minister of finance, like his senior minister, he loves to, they come and they talk about borrowing and access to loans and how much money we could get at low interest rate as some sort of achievement, some sort of political accomplishment when we could borrow money. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the accomplishment is when you can generate money to survive and pay your bills without borrowing. That is the accomplishment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not borrowing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of these numbers, as rattled out by the member for San Fernando East, I really want to find out Well, I'm asking, what does those numbers mean to the farmers in Rio Claro who can't get an access road fixed in 5 years? It means nothing to them. What does all of those positive numbers mean to the constituents of Mayaro in Bangladesh, Ecclesville, that have 17 landslips on one road? 17, Mr. Deputy Speaker. How all that numbers affecting those people's lives? How does those numbers affect the lives of the fishermen who are at the mercy of pirates offshore? Nobody here for the evening has said how that is affecting those people, because that is the life they live, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Again, member for Laventille West, you'll have the opportunity to enter the debate. Right? No, please. No. Hello, hold on. One speaker. Member for Laventille West. Again, I only recognize Mayaro for now. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And indeed, the member for Mayaro is a good person to recognize, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in closing of my issue for the member for San Fernando East, I would present to you that the good numbers that the junior minister spoke of was more of circumstance than PNM brilliance. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, circumstances are performing better than the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's all right, that's okay, that's all right. My wife loves me. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member, and then you're going to call for the speaker to protect you. Address the chair, please. Right, address the chair. No, member for Laventille West, please. Mayaro, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, debt. We are here to discuss lifting a ceiling of debt. But debt is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Debt allows you to grow. Debt allows you to invest in capacity building things, and debt allows you to have a vision for future prosperity. But debt, Mr. Deputy Speaker, must be anchored on future earnings. Too much debt will cause can cause unnecessary developmental opportunities to be sidelined when you have to take your money and pay interest and so on debt. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are here today to give the government permission to lift the current ceiling from 65 billion to 75 billion TT dollars. As mentioned previously, this is the 4th time in 8 years that the government of the day is coming to the Parliament to lift the debt ceiling. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to address a comment that was made by the member for San Fernando East, and I'm sorry I have to go back to him. The honorable member made a comment that the People's Partnership under the member for Superior had saddled a generation with debt to repay. He said that. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't understand what was meant by saddle a generation, because this is what the CSO says, the central bank says. From 2011 to 2015, deficit financing totaled $15.36 billion. 15. In 4 years, 11 to 15. But let's roll the tail of the tape of the People's National Movement and government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, from fiscal 2016 to 2020, you know what was the deficit? $47.9 billion. What? 47. Now we're talking about saddling a generation with debt. Partnership was 15. Fiscal 2016 to 2020, 47.9 billion. From 2016 to 2023, which was last year, that total is $62.3 billion. What? Now I refer this under the context that I said that is not necessarily a bad thing. Depending on what you're spending the money on, that will bring revenue. Not only the development, because development is building and bridge and road and all these things, but how do we grow people? How does this money grow us socially as a people? Improving the social status of our citizenry. So to come here and say that the People's Partnership saddled this country with a generation of debt at 15 billion, and we presented a 400-page document with every single thing that was done under the People's Partnership that you could look, you could feel, you could see. But you are saddling this country with $62.3 billion in debt, but that is saddling anybody, sadly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what this government is painting as a positive development is an additional debt burden, a worsening debt to GDP ratio, and it is a financial yoke that is going to be levied on the future generations of this country. Anyhow you spin it, whether you fluff it with an IMF report or whether you sell it on a political platform, that is the reality of the matter. And that has to mean something to the citizen, has to mean something to the persons living in the Myra constituency, all of them who's listening to this debate this evening. Mr. Deputy Speaker, for 8 years, this administration, looking at the numbers, have really failed to provide any sort of upward mobility economically and socially for our citizens. Their policies that have been put forward year after year under beautiful captions in the annual budget, it has really suppressed and strangled creativity amongst our people, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the end of fiscal 2015, which marked the end of the governance of the People's Partnership under the hand of the member for Paray, our fiscal revenues, Mr. Deputy Speaker, could have easily covered about 76% of the country's debt. That is how you administer government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you can manage your debt by the revenue that you generate. However, during this last 8 years, that 76% has dropped down to a little under 40%, more along the line of 39.5%. And you see the problem in that, it underscores our challenge of having to service debt today. And today, we are here to add an additional space of $10 billion that the state, that the government can maneuver inside. But what we've not heard from any of the speakers opposite is really the revenue side of this thing. Where this money is going to come from to service this debt. And I know the member for San Fernando East may talk about all the beautiful things about the non-energy sector and so on and so on. And the member could have spoken at length, but I will draw his attention to what the IMF say shortly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are two fundamental issues that have arisen here today. The first issue, which I've spoken a bit before, how are these borrowing improving the quality of the lives for our citizens? The Quality. What is quality? Quality is how they wake up in the morning, get water to brush their teeth, make their tea, get lunch, go to a job, drive on the road, no pothole, garbage moving out and so on. How is this boring? Improving the lives of citizens. How is this borrowing with the capacity to borrow? Where are we heading with this borrowing? How is that going to lift the opportunities for the 20% of citizens that is under the poverty line in this country? Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the second issue that we should have addressed, hopefully when the minister is wrapping up he will address it, is what is the government going to do to take us out of this spiraling debt trap that we find ourselves in? Those things have to be addressed for the benefit of the national community in understanding why we as a parliament is here today to approve the government's request to get a bit more money or space, fiscal space to maneuver their plans going forward. So, Deputy Speaker, if I were to draw your attention to the Express newspaper in its editorial of March 12, 2024, they really analyzed the issue perfectly. And this is what the editorial states, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Despite statistical growth, many individuals still face the stark realities of unemployment, rising food prices, and other financial strains on a daily basis, not only on weekends, every single day. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you are a member of Parliament for a constituency like Mayaro, which is a rural community, where people have to eke out a living sometimes day by day, every dollar counts, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The editorial, Mr. Deputy Speaker, goes on to say, and I quote, "It's imperative for policymakers and leaders to ensure that economic progress translate into tangible benefits for all members of society, addressing concerns of job security, economic hardship faced by the man in the street." And that is the important thing here, Mr. Deputy Speaker. How is all of this that we're doing here impacting the man on the street? Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have heard no evidence from anybody on the government side speaking today that whatever the plans are making qualitative differences to the life of the man on the street. And that is what is important. That is what we are here to do, to make sure that whatever action we take improves the life of the man on the street. If we were to look at the bilateral reports, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are facing money problems. Moody's says that our credit risk is moderate. But S&P thinks that, we're getting, very, very close to risky territory. That is what they say in all the nice lingo and jargon. But again, I ask the question, what would the latest public borrowing facility do for the thousands of people without jobs and really struggling to make ends meet for them and their family, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're going to move the credit limit today from 65 billion to 75 billion. Are our citizens going to get a better water supply at the end of this year? Will our UE and UTT graduates find decent opportunity for jobs? Will they? Will that $10 billion, hopefully a portion of it is going to go into some serious investments? Are they going to put the hundreds of graduates who come to all of our offices, MPs, every day, looking for a decent job? There's a difference between a work and a decent job, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They want decent job because they've worked hard in university for 4 years, and they've sacrificed, and their parents have sacrificed. The function of the state is really to deliver for these children. Mr. Deputy Speaker, will our maxi and taxi drivers, are they able to meet their loan repayments while fighting with deplorable road conditions, and their hard-earned money goes in the pockets of the spare parts dealers because you have to fix your motor car. The question here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that as we approve this additional bandwidth of spending for the government, how does it address those urgent needs of our citizens while putting all of us into further debt going forward? Mr. Deputy Speaker, much has been said of the 3.2% unemployment rate, which was adopted by the IMF. Without question, at the end of the day, we have to accept the data as placed on the record. But how do you account for the steep joblessness that is affecting our country? How? As members of Parliament every day, I don't know about the rest of all you, but they knock on my door every day looking for jobs, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So it is hard to digest that the country has a 3.2% unemployment rate, which the statistics will tell you they call that full employment. So that phrase alone, I think, does get people upset. That you can't be at full employment and so many people looking on the side of the road to make a hustle, knocking on doors, willing to do anything to work, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and qualified people, if you may add that. And what is alarming to me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, while the CSO and the IMF says the country rate of unemployment is 3.2%, you know what CSO tells me? Mayaro as a constituency, our unemployment rate is 14.5%. 14.5%, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So all that, CSO, go check it yourself, go online, yeah, Mayaro, go and check it, them call me. They want to know what we're doing up there. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sorry. 14.5% tells me that there are about 5,000 people unemployed in Mayaro. And that is a huge number when we have to deal with bridging those gaps. And this is why I say the simple day-to-day lives of our people in Mayaro, $1 is important to them when you have 5,000 people unemployed. And if we will accept CSO 3.2 for the national community, I will accept CSO 14.5% for Mayaro. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government, over the years, as much as the member for Port of Spain, North, St. Anne's, West, spoke about the busy bee lifestyle of him and the Prime Minister in the global energy boardwalks and boardrooms and halls, that hasn't reflected in anything here as yet. Perhaps 10 years down the road. Because communities like Guayaguayari, Rio Claro, and Mayaro, we have been at the short end of the stick with the collapse of the investment capacity and facilities of the energy sector. How will this $10 billion in fiscal space to borrow for investment help our sector in that area? Mr. Deputy Speaker, poverty in Trinidad and Tobago is real and it is worrisome. And no amount of fluffing and padding any conversation here in this Parliament will take away the reality of how Trinidadians and Tobagonians are living day to day. The minister, when he gets this approval later this evening, he must ensure, Honorable Minister must ensure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that any debt going forward, because we are in a very difficult place Because I haven't heard how we're paying that debt as yet. But whatever, and they could bring how much they want, we must be able to lift people, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because this is about people. It's not here about just numbers, it's about people. Funds that we are going to allow the state to borrow, to invest, it must be to solve problems in this country, problems of sustainable jobs, greater access to educational opportunities, moving a minimum wage to a living wage, stemming inflation, and other meaningful ventures. So, Deputy Speaker, there is the issue which hasn't been addressed by anyone. How do we lift our economy out of having to find further borrowings? How do we do that? How would we use what we are investing so far, what we are going to invest with this $10 billion of fiscal space? How are we going to ensure that that is going to reduce or stop our reliance from going and borrow money? Because it is a problem when we have to figure out a way sometime in the future that we have to figure out a way how to borrow yourself out of debt. That is a challenge that any government of the future will have to deal with. So, Deputy Speaker, the member for San Fernando East spoke about the non-energy sector and how well they were performing. And I have no reason to doubt him. I've seen the numbers myself. The numbers are doing well. They can do much better. I mean, I've spoken to several of them. There are issues that they have asked the government to look at, and it's a work in progress. But you know, in business, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we have to make decisions in terms of planning, we sometimes have to look at the long-term picture. And sometimes we have to take the data as it is, rather than reading things into it that may not be there. And I'll give you an example. If one had to listen or to reflect on what the member for San Fernando East said a little while ago, this is what the IMF said in the very same report that the minister was quoting. Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm quoting from the IMF report here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago needs all its engines. That tells me not all the engines working, according to the IMF. Trinidad and Tobago needs all its engines to boost growth and secure a more diversified, green, resilient, and inclusive economy. Now, if we were doing so well on the run-up to that IMF report, to me, the IMF might have been a little more gentle in that line. But what I am reading here, by the use of the term all its engines, they are not satisfied that we're using all the engines necessary. What I also read from that is that there must be diversification from the energy sector. So the 70% which the minister spoke about in the non-energy trade, which is good.
Honourable Member, you have just about a minute, under 2 minutes of your initial speaking time. You have an additional 15. Care to avail yourself? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the IMF identifies that we need to shake our reliance of the energy sector, and I agree as a proponent that we do have energy. We will remain an energy economy for another 20, 30 years. But we can't remain an energy economy only. So the IMF have found it important to write in its report that it is important to foster growth in the non-energy sector. So it means that whatever we're doing, we need to do more of it, and we need to do it faster. But if you were to reflect on the opposition benches over the last few years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've been saying that from day one. The member for Urupuch West and I have been speaking on these matters ad nauseam. But yet today, the IMF has to say it as well. The Minister of Energy, member for Port of Spain, North, Centre and West, spent his entire contribution rewriting history in the oil sector in this country. With all the work that they claim to have been doing, this is the reality of the statistics, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Over the period from January 2016 to October 2023, oil production dropped by 27%, gas by 36%, LNG production by 41%. Now, the CBTT also indicated that oil production is now around 55,000 barrels of oil. So what that tells me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and from what I heard here this evening, there are no imminent signs of recovery in any of these production areas. Everything new we speak about today have a 5 or 7 year horizon. It ain't happening tomorrow. What are we doing in the meantime? Nobody has spoken about that. What do we do in the meantime while these things mature? So, Deputy Speaker, and the reason why that is important to know, it will convince the citizens of this country how are we going to repay this debt. That's all we want to know, you know. How are we going to repay this debt? Because debt financing is something that you have to anchor on future earnings. So, Deputy Speaker, in the couple minutes that I have left, I want to encourage the member for Laventille West as well to work hard as Minister of National Security, to work and get the crime situation in this country under control. The fear of crime needs to be tackled frontally, Minister, because it is impacting what we call the domestic economy in terms of the ability for nightlife to thrive, in terms of our restaurant businesses and so on, movement of people. And when we could get our domestic economy going, we have money to pay that. So, Deputy Speaker, we must look at dealing frontally with the issue of our food imports. Don't have time to go into too much of that, but we keep moving. I think we're up to almost $7 billion. If we can rein that in, that money can help in dealing with paying with our debt financing going forward. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in closing, Trinidad and Tobago really faces a multifaceted challenge when you combine declining energy production, dwindling revenues from across the board, and now these mounting debt obligations that we will have. Addressing these challenges would require prudent fiscal management, strategic resource allocation, and a concerted effort to revitalize the energy sector and push the diversification process right along speedily. So, Deputy Speaker, failure to address these issues effectively, it will jeopardize our long-term economic stability and prosperity. So, Deputy Speaker, sadly, I do not believe that my colleagues across have the capacity to deliver on this particular job, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And in closing, minding all the couture that they like to pelt across on this side, I want to say that every one of us here remain united and strong to move the PNM out of government. And we will look forward to the day when we see the back of every one of you all. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Members, I recognize the member for Lopino Bonnet.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for recognizing me. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have not started on being provoked and disturbed by the member for Caroni Central. This parliament was going so good before his presence, but we will not be disturbed by him, Mr. Deputy.